Hi everyone, it's Lisa from My Dream in Soap. Welcome to my channel. Now, I didn't have an awful lot to say in my intro today, so I thought we'd just jump straight into making the soap. Now, the first thing I need to do for my sunset landscape is actually make a sun so it can set. So I'm going to start off with some magic yellow, and that's from mineral makeup ingredients and some titanium dioxide. So this embed is just going to be a round column embed, and I'm sure you've seen probably lots of people do moon embeds, that type of thing. So I have bought my batter to trace, but it is actually really quite a light trace because I kind of want this streak to be quite feathery through my sun. Now, I'm predominantly doing my sun white. Now, it may seem quite weird, but when you look at a lot of sort of pictures of sunsets, the sun as it's setting is so hot that it's actually gone that sort of burning white heat colour. So I'm just going to have white with a little bit of a streak of the yellow going through it. Now, I didn't have anything small enough in my collection of various pipes and things that I've got. So what I'm using is just this cardboard tube, and all it is the centre out of a roll of cling wrap, and I've just lined it with freezer paper and I've popped some duct tape on the bottom so that the soap won't leak out of it. So I'm just going to simply pour my soap batter into my tube, pop it into a bottle to stop it falling over. Then I'll just seal the top with some more duct tape and leave it until the next day. And then the colours for my soap the next day are Sunset Orange from the Soapery, and I'm going to actually add a little touch of neon orange to that to give it a little bit of a boost. And then I'm going to do exactly the same sort of thing with my yellows. I'm using magic yellow from mineral makeup ingredients and giving that a little boost with a neon yellow from Mica Mama. Now, neons can actually be quite difficult to disperse, so I have already spent a good amount of time really mixing my neons well and making sure that there's no flecks at all in those before I add those to the other colours. And then finally, I'm just going to be using some activated charcoal and some titanium dioxide as well. Now, I'm actually going to be building my soap upside down in the mould. And this is the inspiration picture that I've got that I'm going to base my soap on. So I want to have some darker areas towards the edges, and then as I get closer and closer to the sun, I want to have those brighter oranges and even some yellows and whites coming in. The fragrance oil I'm using is warm sandalwood from NI Candles in the UK. I've mixed up my batter to just past emulsion, and I'm perhaps unusually adding my fragrance oil at this stage, and that's because I know this fragrance oil doesn't accelerate trace at all, so it's just easier to add it in now rather than trying to divide it all up later. I then split my batter out and mixed in the colours that I wanted. Now, to get the effect that I want, that's sort of like the horizontal areas in the sky, I'm going to be using some squeeze bottles. I am actually going to be playing around with these colours a little bit, so adding some activated charcoal to get them darker towards the top and the edges of the sky, and then just either using the pure colour or adding some titanium dioxide as I get closer to the sun. So I've unmoulded my sun embed, and that unmoulds pretty easily because that cardboard tube was lined with freezer paper. And then I'm just going to trim that embed and fit it to my mould. So now just start adding those colours to the sky. Now, I have got my trace, a definite trace. It's not too runny because I don't want these colours really sinking into each other, and I want sort of the pattern across the sky to be fairly horizontal. And once all the sky's poured, I'm going to use this scraper tool that I've made to scrape out that first set of mountains. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this sculpted layers technique. I did a video recently going into detail about how you can make your own sculpted layers, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description. So I'll just continue on with the scraping, and once that's done, I'll just make sure I clean down the sides thoroughly before starting the next layer. So I'm now going to fill in that first mountain range, and I've decided I'm going to bring in a bonus colour here. I want that first set of mountains to be sort of like a really dark golden type colour to sort of echo the reflection of that sort of sunbeam, as it were. So I have brought in some golden shimmer from Mica Mama, and I'm going to just darken that with a little bit of activated charcoal. Now I'm actually going to use a different fragrance oil for my layers. The sandalwood is actually probably a bit too well behaved, it just doesn't accelerate trace at all. So I'm going to use some of this black rose and oud because it does actually move really quite quickly. But the lovely thing about it is it moves and goes to a nice sort of scrapable trace. It doesn't go rock hard like soap on a stick. So it's probably my new favourite fragrance oil for doing any type of scraping layers, that type of thing. So it is just a case of mixing everything up and then pouring it in, just making sure that you're putting it into the areas that you want it to land in. I tend not to make an excessive amount of soap batter and just fill up, the entire layer of the mould. I try and be a little bit more careful so I'm just not wasting too much soap and scraping too much extra out. And you can see with this fragrance oil that it's actually thickening up as I pour it. And that's brilliant for this technique because I can now mound it into the areas that I want, and then I can pretty well straight away get on with scraping out that second layer without having to wait endlessly for a fragrance oil to set up. And never worry with this technique if that when you scrape through first of all you don't get a nice complete pattern. As long as your batter is still nice and malleable, you can just keep going back and filling in those gaps and then scraping through. And that's a much more efficient way of using soap batter rather than completely filling across the entire mould and then scraping loads and loads of excess out. Then I'll just repeat the process, bringing in some dark grey mountains next, and then some black mountains last of all. And then finally, to finish off, doing the sea. So the sea in my inspiration picture was sort of like a golden shimmery colour with some sort of silver blacky streaks through it. So I'm going to be using those colours. But obviously also I want to bring in the reflection of that setting sun. So I'm going to be using my oranges, yellows and whites again to bring in that reflection.
There's some stains on your photo, little cracks on your rusty frame, stuck in the mud all
So look at that, it's the next day already and time to cut the soap. Ooh, pretty. Look at those, I'm really pleased with those. I like the mountains and I'm especially pleased with that reflection of the sun on that sea at the bottom. Now unfortunately, because I've mucked around with my fragrance oils and some different micas, I'm not allowed to legally sell this soap in the UK, so you won't see it in my online shop. However, if you're interested in maybe getting hold of some scrapers like I've used to make this soap, or some scrapers for other soaps that I've made, I'm going to be listing those along with various embeds like my cat embed and honey pots and that sort of thing in my shop very shortly. So if you are interested, then go over to my website and just subscribe for the email updates and you'll get notified as soon as those are available. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you like the soap. Thanks so much for watching. Happy soaping!